It was the winter of 1959. The Ural Mountains of Russia were buried deep under snow. The air carried a sharp, biting chill that could cut through skin. A group of young students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute decided to set out on a daring winter expedition, one that would soon become one of the greatest mysteries in modern history. Their leader was Igor Alexeyevich Dyatlov, just 23 years old, intelligent, disciplined, calm under pressure. Alongside him were 8 others, all experienced hikers, 7 men and 2 women. Their goal, to reach Mount Otorten, a peak rated as Grade 3 difficulty during the Soviet era, the most challenging level of all. On January 23, 1959, they departed from Sverdlovsk city, traveling by train, by truck, and finally on foot through the freezing terrain. They carried compasses, tents, skis, food supplies, and cameras, everything perfectly organized. Dyatlov kept a diary, carefully noting down every day's details, while each member maintained their own journal. They were young, full of life, laughter, and energy. In their photographs, you can see wide smiles, playful snow fights, and that spark of adventure in their eyes. But none of them knew that within just a few days, this journey of dreams would turn into a message of death. By January 30th, everything was still fine, though the trail was getting tougher. The snow was getting deeper, the wind stronger, and temperatures had dropped to -25 degrees Celsius. On January 31st, they set up a temporary camp to store extra equipment so they could travel lighter on their way back. And then came their final recorded day, February 1st, 1959. That evening, they pitched their tent on the slope of a mountain called Kholat Syakhl. The local Mansi tribe called it the Mountain of the Dead. They set up their tent at a point where the mountain's ground began to slant. Not at the flat base, not at the peak, but on a mid-slope where icy winds and snow struck directly against their shelter. It was an unusual choice because hikers rarely camp on such exposed, tilted terrain. Below them was a forest, calmer, safer, less cold. But Dyatlov, their confident leader, decided otherwise. He believed that descending into the forest would take them off course and waste precious daylight climbing back up the next morning. So he ordered, "We'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow, we march straight for Otorten." No one questioned his decision. After all, he was their leader, and they trusted him. But that very spot would become the place of their final night and the beginning of an unsolved mystery that still haunts the world. Inside the tent, they cooked dinner, laughed, wrote in their diaries, and went to sleep. What happened after that, only those 9 souls would ever know. Days passed. When their families and friends realized they hadn't returned, a search operation began. At first, volunteers went out. Then the military joined the hunt. On February 26th, rescuers finally discovered the tent, half buried in snow. But what they found left everyone stunned. The tent had been slashed open from the inside. It looked as if someone, in pure panic, had cut their way out with a knife. Inside lay all their belongings: clothes, boots, food, notebooks, everything in perfect order. But not a single person was there. Following the tracks down the slope, searchers found 2 bodies near a tall cedar tree: Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. Both were barefoot, wearing only underwear. Their hands were burned, as if they had tried to light a fire that the snow later extinguished. A little further down the slope, 3 more bodies were found: Dyatlov himself, Zenaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. They appeared to have been trying to return to the tent. Their clothing was incomplete, and their expressions, frozen mid-struggle, told a story of sheer terror. Rustem had a small fracture on his skull, but no external wound. Weeks later, as the snow melted, the final 4 bodies were discovered in a small ravine, about 75 meters below. These 4 were dressed more warmly, perhaps wearing clothes stripped from the first victims in a desperate attempt to survive. But their injuries were horrifying. Ludmila Dubinina's tongue was missing. Her eyes were gone. Her ribs were crushed. Alexander Zolotaryov and Nikolai Fibo-Brignol had massive skull fractures, as if hit by an enormous invisible force. And yet, there were no external wounds, no sign of struggle, no sign of another human being. It was as though the force had come from inside their bodies. Autopsy reports confused everyone. Doctors said some injuries were equal to those seen in a car crash. Yet there was no sign of any avalanche, rockfall, or attack. Some had simply frozen to death. Others suffered catastrophic trauma. The tent showed no signs of a fight. Everything appeared oddly organized, deliberate, but incomprehensible. What could have happened that night? Why would 9 experienced hikers flee their tent barefoot into a blizzard in sub-zero temperatures? The first theory to emerge was the avalanche theory. Perhaps snow slid down and buried part of their tent, forcing them to run. But investigators noted the slope was less than 30 degrees, far too gentle for an avalanche. And the tent wasn't crushed under any heavy snow. Then came the military experiment theory. The Ural region was close to secret Soviet missile testing zones. Rescuers found traces of radiation on some of the victims' clothing. Witnesses later claimed they saw orange glowing orbs in the sky that same night. Were they military flares or something else? The government stayed silent. In 1959, the case was abruptly closed. The official conclusion read, "Death caused by an unknown compelling force." Years later, another explanation appeared, the infrasound theory. A researcher named Donnie Eicher suggested that powerful winds around the mountain could produce a low-frequency sound, one that humans cannot consciously hear, but that can trigger panic, dizziness, and irrational fear. Maybe the hikers experienced that, cut open their tent in confusion, and ran for their lives into the deadly cold. But that still didn't explain the severe internal injuries or the radiation. Another story gained popularity: the Yeti theory. One of the group's last photographs seemed to show a dark human-like figure standing far away in the snow. People claimed it was some unknown creature, perhaps the snowman of legend. But no physical evidence ever proved this claim. Then came the Cold War espionage theory. Some researchers believed that 2 hikers might have secretly worked for the KGB, involved in an illegal weapon exchange. Maybe they witnessed something they weren't supposed to, and were silenced. But again, there was no proof, only speculation. Decades passed. Questions remained. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case. By 2020, they announced their conclusion. The Dyatlov group died due to a slab avalanche. A small section of snow slid over their tent, forcing them to flee in panic. Yet many scientists still disagreed. The slope was too shallow, and there was no physical evidence of such a slide. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the most mysterious unsolved tragedies in human history. 9 young lives, their dreams, their laughter, their final diary notes, all buried under eternal snow. Their cameras captured the last photos: snow, a tent, an eerie light in the distance. And then, nothing. On the last page of Dyatlov's diary, he wrote, "No matter how cold, we will reach our goal." Maybe that goal wasn't the mountain at all. Maybe it was a destination beyond this world, a place where only questions remain. Even today, when travelers visit Kholat, Syakhl, they say the air feels heavy. The silence is different. When the wind blows hard at night, it almost sounds like faint voices echoing through the snow, as if those 9 souls are still whispering what really happened to us that night.